Legacy Wealth Management, if you don't know what it is, take the time to find out what it is. We've counted on them for advice on many issues, and we're going to do the same thing today. Paul Meyers owns it. Paul, tell people what Legacy Wealth Management is.
Well, Legacy Wealth Management is a full-service financial services company. We've been around for quite a while. We have a long background in the financial services industry, and basically what we do is we help people with their IRAs or their retirement accounts or rolling over 401ks or money they might have to invest. You know, we help them plan for retirement and do things like that.
Okay. Well, I want to talk a little bit because people are calling it the September slide, where the Dow is going. It's turned down 3 straight weeks of losses. What does this mean long term? What is this an indicator, inflation, or what? Let me put it there. What's going on? Yeah.
Well, this is, I've been doing this for over 30 years and really closer to 40 if you include my time on the other side of the desk. And we see this often. And it's not an indicator of a long-term problem, but it's an indicator of some short-term excitement. September is traditionally the worst month for stock market investors. The worst month.
Why?
Oh, a lot of reasons. I don't know why. I guess is a good answer.
Fiscally, it's a government financial year.
Yeah, it just is. Typically, September has not been a good month for the market. It has some exceptions, but, one of the 12 has to be the worst, and it's September.
And glad it wasn't November.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that October, November, December is usually one of the stronger periods for the market. So we have a weak period in September. We have a strong period towards the end of the year. We believe at Legacy that we're headed for better times. We don't think inflation is going to be a huge problem. It'll be a concern. Here's what's going on right now. This whole business about the coronavirus resurge. Because you check with the hospitals and the number of available beds is not big. The hospitals are getting filled, and we're seeing coronavirus levels like we didn't see going back to way last year. That's a problem. Starting tomorrow on Tuesday, the Federal Reserve meets, and there's some question about, well, maybe they're going to start pulling back some of that support, that lifeline they've been throwing to the economy, because that's what's been going on for a couple of years now, is the Federal Reserve has been buying bonds, building up the economy, supporting the stock market, but supporting other, it isn't just supporting the stock market when you send money out to individuals so they can spend money. So it's been a good thing. It's kind of like going into the emergency room, because let's face it, in March of 2020, when they said, oh, by the way, coronavirus is a real epidemic, that's like going into the emergency room. And the doctor there put you on a little bit of a lifeline. And now the Federal Reserve is talking about, we may want to start easing down on that lifeline. That causes some concern. One more thing that's beating up the markets right now is there's a Chinese company you've never heard of before called Evergrande Development, and they're a big Chinese development firm with a lot of real estate and other things like that, and they're having some major league problems right now. So it's kind of the perfect storm, 1, 2, 3, hitting the market.
I want to talk about coronavirus a little bit, though, because for the economy to work, there's got to be people working. And so I was one of the ones that supported getting people off that life support or whatever, that, once we had our hands around COVID at one point, if some of the people would go get vaccinated, we'd have it again. It's just ridiculous. But that being said, once we had our hands and we saw the numbers dropping and we still had people on extended unemployment, Governor Burgum pulled that benefit away, even though it was there from the federal government. I think he did the right thing. I believe we needed to get these people back in the workforce. That isn't happening.
Joel, 9 times out of 10, you and I agree on an awful lot of things. Governor Burgum pulling back on long-term unemployment benefits is not something I agree with. Okay. And it's been proven around the country that where the states have pulled back on unemployment benefits, and we all know which states those were, it has not helped.
They were red states.
Yeah, I don't want to say that, but they were definitely red states. It has not helped the unemployment situation one bit. The fact is, according to the surveys that have been done by professional firms, people have left a lot of industries that they used to be in because the coronavirus was an opportunity for them to realize that this was not where they wanted to work for the rest of their life. And now, and I support the restaurants, seriously, I think they need some help. But you know, if you were a worker and you're offered a fairly good wage, but your hours are going to be from 11 until 1:30 and 4:30 until 7, is that what you'd want? I don't think so. And the reality is unemployment rates have come down. And I personally, you know, the interesting thing is when the government pumps money into things like long-term unemployment benefits, guess what happens to that money? It gets spent. It gets bought for materials, and it circulates throughout the economy some 7 times in a year. And that creates new taxes that the government gets to collect. They get paid back pretty fast. And people can survive, and it's a good thing. When you give money to the very, very wealthy, they don't go out and buy another yacht. No, they put it in the market, or they put it in their savings account, or they do with it whatever they want to, but they don't use it for basic living expenses. And that's why some of us out there believe it's okay to support parts of the economy.
So where did they go, though? Their unemployment benefits ran out. They still got to have eggs in the fridge. They got to have milk in the fridge. They got to have a loaf of bread in the cupboard. So where did they go? Or are we talking about 2-income families where they decided they could live off one income?
You know, I'm not sure the answer to that, but I will say that that I don't think they're just hiding out there not working. I don't think they're sleeping in until noon. They're either looking for a better job or going back to school or taking the one income instead of 2 income. I'm not sure what they're doing, but it's certainly a tough time in the economy and a big challenge, and not something that's going to be handled overnight. But I think generally speaking for the investment world, you know, it's not going to be a big watershed moment. 2021, I think, is going to turn out to be pretty good. It's just sometimes we get spoiled by what pretty good means. And I think it'll be a good year.
You said you're not worried long-term about interest rates going up. They've been low for a long time. Some might say artificially low. When do we see that change? At some point, either it changes or it doesn't mean a doggone thing.
Yeah, I think interest rates are going up. There's no doubt about it. And they aren't going up maybe as fast as they would have if the Federal Reserve weren't regulating things. But they popped a little bit the other day when people started buying a little more in treasuries. But there hasn't been a big rush of money into treasuries either. So interest rates still pretty low. I mean, let's face it, when you go out and buy a home or refinance and get an interest rate in the 3% category, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Exactly. Want to talk a little bit about people's IRAs. Are people riding it out? Are they working longer? I mean, when you sit and look at the planning, I just had a brother-in-law retire. He's 69 years old. I had a sister retire. She's 67. She's going to be mad I said her age, so I won't say her name.
No,
but Julie.
never guess
but
if it
Julie
is.
did retire. You know, so what happens? I mean, those are ages where I don't think they thought they were going to work too. Yeah. If that makes any sense. You know, what happens with those?
Well, I think people are probably working longer than they used to. That probably applies to the two of us as well as an awful lot of other people out there. But then we're feeling better at an older age. Mm-hmm. You know, it used to be when you got to be 60, 62 years old, you were pretty tired. And now I think, you know, people are working until they're 70 quite often. Mm-hmm. We are not seeing big trends, however, for people who are saying, boy, I'm worried about the market, I'm going to have to work an extra 5 years. We're not seeing that. But what we are seeing is people who say, you know, I feel pretty good, I enjoy my job, maybe I'll cut down on the number of hours, maybe I'll retire from one job and collect my 401k, but then work part-time somewhere else, which we think is a great strategy, by the way. That's kind of what we're seeing. We're not seeing people saying, oh, boy, my account is way down, I better keep working. Because really, our attitude is that even if your account is down this week or this month, hang on. If you're in the right kinds of things, for many people, you're probably going to recover and do just fine.
When we come back, folks, I want to get a chance to talk about minimum wage. Also, want to get a chance to talk about national debt. Do those two matter anymore? We'll ask Paul Meyers right after this. I've known Paul Meyers for a long, long time, you know, longer than both of us want to admit. The truth of the matter is Legacy Wealth Management is a place that a lot of people count on. And so we were talking in the last segment about financing. We were talking about IRAs. We were talking about where all that goes. I want to talk a little bit, if we can, about a couple of things of interest to me, Paul, and that's minimum wage. You know, we have a lot of jobs out there that aren't being filled. And so, you know, the people that might have been making X amount and then living off tips, they're not coming back to work. You know that, and I know that. You just explained it to people. Does the minimum wage count anymore? Does it matter anymore?
Yeah, I think it does, because it kind of sets a bar below which, you know, you can't go as an employer. And I think most employers have found that they can't get down to that bar now anyway, because nobody's willing to work for it. And let's face it, you can't, no one can live on $7 or $8 an hour. You just can't. Not with the cost of everything these days. And it is a problem, and it's been a debate for 50 years. Well, if we raise the minimum wage, what about the other people? Don't they have to get their wages raised too? And then does that just keep spiraling upwards? I don't know the answer to that, but I would say that probably getting the minimum wage up is not a bad thing to do. It needs to get a little higher. And you know, almost everybody that I ever talk to says, you know, I'd be willing to pay a little bit more for something if the employee was getting paid more. And they'd even be willing to pay more if it's made in America, although they say that, but they often shop everywhere where it's not made in America.
That's spot on true. I used to just adhere to that, and I catch myself not doing it all the time now.
Yeah.
I still drive American cars, but I found out it doesn't matter because some of those are made in Canada. So,
can you just imagine if back 10 or 15 years ago, well, about 2008, 2009, when Governor Romney, who had some great ideas, but he was saying, well, let's just let all those cars be made over in Japan. What's the difference?
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That would have been a bad deal.
Well, you can't buy a bicycle anymore built in this country.
No. You can hardly buy a bicycle, period.
Period. I want to go back to the minimum wage, though. You know, there's a lot of people who believe that minimum wage is just, you know, that's teenagers, that's little part-timers. I don't think people understand how many people in this country actually only make minimum wage.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be stereotypical, but you go to some bigger cities. You go to some of the larger cities. A lot of the people doing the housekeeping, from talking to them in some of the hotels, they make minimum wage. I mean, you know, here's what I do, Paul. If it's $10, I'll just tip something. Just leave something. To, you know, I don't think people realize, and how many people that are of working age, that's their full-time job, and they're making minimum wage.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things we look at Legacy Wealth Management when we're examining different companies and ones we like is what kind of profit levels they have. And let me tell you, profits in this country for big corporations are at all-time levels.
Yeah.
They're at all-time highs. Could they afford to probably pay their employees a little better? Yeah, I think they could. And
but how are you going to make rockets then? I mean, how are you going to go to the moon? How are you going to shoot into space? We saw that over the weekend. You know, when you are worth so many $billion that, you know, you're sitting there saying, I'm going to pay my folks $16 an hour now. And that's a big thing while you're building yourself a rocket.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
No, I understand what you're saying, Joel. I guess my point is simply this. When, you know, I think when a company can make, and the pharmaceutical companies are great examples of this, and the insurance companies. You know, a lot of people complain that, oh, you know, my insurance went up over the last couple of years. And who are they going to blame? They're going to blame the government for one thing or another. The fact is the insurance companies were making record profits, and their CEOs were making record salaries. And, you know, I don't know how you regulate all that. I really don't. That's way beyond our pay grades. But I will tell you this. People need to get paid a wage that they can earn at, and they need to do the work that's going to benefit the company so that they will the company will do well too.
And as you know, the pandemic has shown us they need to do work that fulfills them.
Yes.
Because when they left these jobs, they went back and they said, like you said, you know, earlier in the show, if they're not doing something that makes them happy or feel as though they accomplished something, they're going to quit.
I think they do, yeah. And it happens. And, you know, I see it at my own company where when an employee, I'm thinking of one in particular, went out on their own and got some additional education and additional training and then came in and said, maybe I deserve a wage increase. And I said, you know what? You absolutely deserve a wage increase. And thank you for asking, and let's get her done.
Yeah, exactly. I want to talk a little bit about national debt. I grew up in the era of politics where Kent Conrad said, if we don't get the federal debt under control, I'm going to quit. I'm going to work at this job for 6 years. He did quit. He did. The only reason that the people in North Dakota talked him into running again was because Quentin Burdick died. And so I remember Democrats pushing for the reduction of the federal budget. They wanted a balanced budget. The Republicans turned that around, Newt Gingrich and others, and they turned it into 100% national debt, national debt, national debt. Does either party give a doggone about national debt anymore? It reminds me of how my dad talked about World War II and sailors on leave. Just you're off the ship, go spend it,
Well, your first question was, does either party really care about national debt? And they do when the other party is in power. And when they're in power, then it's, we need to spend this money, and we need to give tax cuts, and we need to do this. The fact is that the national debt is still important, but in particular right now, interest rates are so low that when the government borrows $1 trillion, that's more than you and I will make all year long. When the government borrows $1 trillion but only has to pay 1% interest, that's like borrowing, $4 trillion at a higher rate of interest. So it's a very complicated problem and not one that is easy to answer just by saying, well, if only we cut down the national debt. The fact is most national debt is due and payable to Americans or American organizations. Most of it is. And as a result, when the government owes its own citizens money, that's not such a terrible thing, probably. So I don't like to see the national debt climb unrealistically, but it's not going to be the death of this country, that national debt. We need, sometimes you have to pay for things. It's kind of like an individual family budget. If all of a sudden an emergency came up in the Heitkamp family and you had to go out and borrow $10,000 to solve that problem, no one would say to you, well, you shouldn't borrow the money. You should just deal with the problem and go out of business and live in poverty. No, you'd say, you know what? Right now I need to borrow this money, and someday, hopefully, I'm going to pay it down. And as you remember, in the last 20 years, I believe we have gotten down to just about a zero national debt. So.
The Obama administration in the beginning had to take on national debt because we were close to a depression.
Sure.
It went down every year after that.
Same thing really is what happened with coronavirus. Is because of those concerns we took on more national debt. And it's a great thing. An interesting thing is in the state of North Dakota, as you know, the state of North Dakota received a whole bunch of money from the federal government to help it overcome coronavirus problems.
Yep.
What did it do with that money?
Didn't spend it.
Not a penny.
Not a penny. And if there was ever going to be a special session to move some of that money, fiber alone right now. We just talked about that last week on Down the Road. If they could build that fiber network where it needs to be built. So a young gentleman I talked to from Hillsboro actually had Wi-Fi where he needed it. We'd be a stronger and a better state for it.
Absolutely.
Paul, always good to go down the road with you.
Thank you, and good to be here with you.
Someday I'm going to get you back, and we're going to talk about your time on the Fargo School Board.
Tell you what, I'm glad not to be on there right now.
Yeah. Would you ever run again?
No.
I can't imagine. I mean, people screaming at you at meetings and, acting like idiots. And
did you see that there's national news coverage today on a local Fargo School Board member for her support of the masking issue?
One of the physicians.
Yeah, a shame.
Exactly. Thanks, Paul.